Welcome, everyone. My name is Timothy Summers, and I'm the Executive Director of Digital Trust Initiatives at ASU within the University Technology Office. Additionally, I lead the Pocket effort, ASU's own digital trust solution to support learners along their learner journey. We'll be revealing pockets of the world this evening at 4 p.m. Please feel free to join us for that. We want to express some gratitude for all of the support staff and volunteers that came together and made this possible. Also like to encourage you all to visit our other sessions at the Digital Trust Summit, like the PLN Unconference 2.0 workshop with my colleague, Kate Givicchini, and the Innovate Speaker session, among many others. Some of you saw the keynote with Marcus Anderson and Ada Paris. Wow, such rich programming and rich discussion that we have. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you to the Digital Trust Summit and to our panel discussion on advancing agency and digital trust within education and the workforce. Today, we're joined by an expert panel, and at this stage, I'd just like to briefly introduce them. Diana Ayton-Shenker is the CEO of Leonardo, International Society of Arts, Science, and Technology, and Executive Director of the ASU-Leonardo Initiative. Diana has published 4 books and has been named among the 25 leading women changing the world, as well as among the most inspiring women in nonprofit management. And I gotta say, her work inspires me incredibly. So wonderful to have her here with us today. I'm sure that you'll learn so much from her as I have. Next, we're joined by Kim Hamilton Duffy, architect of the Digital Credentials Consortium, a multi-university international effort designing the future of academic credentials. In her role at MIT Open Learning, her expertise is interoperable standards-based credentials and decentralized identity solutions. And Kim's mission is to expand opportunities to individuals through recognition of learning and skills gained beyond the traditional classroom. And her focus is building the interoperable, privacy-enabling open standards and infrastructure to accomplish this. Wow, thanks for being here, Kim. Followed by Michele Spires, Acting Executive Director of the American Council on Education. Michele comes to us with more than 25 years of wide-ranging experience in post-traditional and workforce education. She's an active leadership voice in the evaluation of post-secondary learning. Michele is passionate about connecting individuals with education and career pathways. Thank you so much for being here with us, Michele. And lastly, Stephen Yadzinski, Senior Innovation Officer at JFFLabs. Stephen works with JFF leaders and teams to identify new opportunities, establish new partnerships, and transform JFF programs and service lines to meet an evolving and dynamic education and workforce ecosystem, leveraging fields of technology, innovation, and all kinds of investment. Stephen is passionate about the role technology can play in creating business-aligned education and workforce social impact. Thank you all to all of our panelists for joining us today. The purpose of today's panel is really to dig a little deeper into the trends, challenges, technological developments, and ways that digital trust and the advancement of agency empowers learners in the workforce. Just quickly, I'd like to start, Kim, with you, kind of starting with a little bit of from your background. You're passionate about expanding opportunities to individuals through recognition of learning and skills gained beyond the traditional classroom. If you could, tell us a little bit about what that means to you, as well as how you feel it relates to learner agency.
Yes, definitely. And unfortunately, the answer is pretty indirect. Because it seems like there's so much work that we still need to do in general for digital records, establishing the authenticity and that it's not been tampered with. So the way that we found is kind of a way to tackle it in any case is by focusing first on the traditional records of learning achievement. So diplomas, transcripts, things like that. But the idea is that if you get the trust sorted out, the mechanism of establishing correctness, authenticity, all of that at, say, the envelope layer versus the content, then ideally you've set up a mechanism for any expression to go along with that, including some kind of well, maybe it's a peer that's making a claim about you're a good collaborator, good teamwork. Now, that's not to say we can just wait for that part. So the difficult challenge of how do you actually semantically what in schemas and all of that, how do you map those to existing data standards efforts and things that you want to say to establish these micro credentials or other claims. So that's a lot of ongoing work that we have to do with the broader community. So the way that we're approaching it is trying to do all at once, and sometimes what feels like a very uneven way. There's a lot of work to do.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting, you talk a bit about, we talk about learner agency and this ability to really kind of put control into the hands of the learner. What kind of trends are you seeing right now, in that space? You're at MIT and there's a multi-university initiative that you guys have been a part of. And just, what kind of really interesting trends are you seeing, Kim, from your vantage point?
Yeah, I think, there's several areas that I think, obviously, the last couple of years, all of the universities have suddenly seen a very increased need for, issuing digital records, digital versions of what they were normally doing. And so this is something that can vary a lot depending on where you're located, like what sort of requirements there might be. But there's still a lot of universities or colleges or higher education institutions where it might look a lot like either something that is, sort of a paper kind of version, or something that just relies on the trust that exists between two parties. Like, I know who that education institution is, and I'm another educational institution, and so I take their word for it. But not a whole lot to do with records that are controlled directly by the individuals. So there's a lot of work happening there. I think a lot of interesting standards, especially around verifiable credentials, which is working into spaces of traditional educational data standards in the US, whether it's open badges, PESC. And then that combined with a lot more interesting identity verification mechanisms. So, there's a lot of interesting work to do, real verification of people. Some might be AI-based methods. But so how do we sort of do all of this in a trustworthy but privacy enabling way? So you don't necessarily want all the identity data to be in that one record. You want people to be able to share and group and present claims in a way that represents exactly what's required and what is appropriate for the context. So it feels like we have a lot of very interesting elements in place, but a lot of these techniques and standards and the ecosystem around it are still very new. So we're still figuring out patterns, things like how do you get these working with regulatory requirements, or things like identity levels of assurance. So I think it still feels like very early days, but all of the elements are sort of emerging that hopefully we can craft these in a good direction for a learner's agency and ability to have control over what they reveal about themselves.
And in talking about this, how learners can really sort of represent themselves, Michele, recently ACE put on a blockchain innovation challenge, specifically interested in solutions that helped learners exercise their agency over their digital identities. Can you kind of share with us a little bit about that challenge and kind of what was ACE really looking for there?
Yeah, and it's ongoing, right? So we can't use past tense just yet. We're in the middle of learning from this, and through a contract with the Department of Education, we thank them for their inspiration to help us with thinking about first phase one is some research. What's going on with blockchain and distributed ledger technologies? How do we boil that down to help colleges and universities kind of understand what this new thing is? To Kim's point about leaning into trust and learning about technology advances. And then what we were able to do is spin into what we call an innovation challenge, where we had some funding from the Department of Education to inspire ecosystems to come together to look at mini projects, to start learning more deeply, to start breaking down what are the challenges and obstacles that the stakeholders in the community, learners, employers, K-12, post-secondary ed are facing. How do we, instead of eating the elephant all at once, how do we break that down and learn from it? So we currently have 4 innovation projects going. Highlighting, if we have a bit of time, is the Lifelong Learner Project out of Utah. Their ecosystem is 13 partners. And they're taking the approach that they're the employer, right? They're looking at K-12 in terms of teachers, agency and control over their verified teaching credentials. So K-12 is, yes, the learning ecosystem, but they're also an employer. And when you think about that, there's 18 different data categories aligned with teacher credentialing, licensing, exemplars of practice. And we know in the teacher world, I hail from a background of K-12 teachers, here's my praxis exam, and it's in a piece of paper, and it's in the manila file folder, and it's shoved in a cabinet somewhere. So we're learning from them how they're moving forward with managing those credentials. Another project underway is very different in terms of Nebraska and the Department of Education with Student One. And this is really looking at the needs of systems involved in students who throughout their lives are going to interact with educational, judicial, behavioral services, governmental and non-governmental organizations. And so when we think about this, this has a lot to do with underage agency. What do you do with under 18? And identity of those records and supporting that until they become of age where they can own their own records. So what does guardianship look like? And this project is really leaning into writing some policy around guardianship that could be benchmarked across the country. So very excited looking into that. And then the last 2 pilots that we're working with are connected to the higher ed. So Texas Women's University, looking at empowering students. This is where I bring a big bias because I live in the world of validating learning and credit for prior learning, but empowering students to really store and share their educational credentials, their transcripts, their badges, their industry employers, jobs that they've had, and how to work through the older, maybe as Kim, you alluded to, the older transcript systems and what needs to change at a college or university. How do we pivot mindset with registrar, admissions, deans, faculty, and the variety of those stakeholders? Which leads, so they're a smaller pilot in that ecosystem of transfer credit, but leading into Unblock Ed with the University of Arizona, really looking at the broader transfer credit issues, working with the University of Arizona, but also the Georgia Institute of Technology and the Gardner Institute in thinking about those transfer credit end-to-end, but also the credit for prior learning as a way forward. So these 4 pilots had some MVP markers this spring. They all receive funding to continue their journey. We're trying to create a little space around them so they can actually work and not be bugged by what have you learned so far. So later this fall, we'll definitely be sharing what are the lessons learned? How can we benchmark what you've learned? What are the hindsights, right? If only we could have hindsights into that. So it's an exciting project and we're looking forward to next steps.
Absolutely wonderful. This is amazing. You know, my team and I have been following along the Blockchain Innovation Challenge. We, found the projects that were selected to just be really fascinating and interesting, and we're just looking forward to learning from the outputs of the reports. Taking pulling on a thread a little bit from where Michele just kind of brought us, Stephen, I'd like to kind of ask you a little bit about the intersection or sort of that nexus with the workforce, and jobs. And so, I know that you and your team have spent a lot of time thinking about and looking at efforts kind of that sit in this space of credentials and education and workforce. And just wondering, what are some of the really exciting things that you're seeing on your end just in terms of that connection points between education and workforce, and how learner agency can maybe help us get there.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it's a big question. You know, what are the exciting things? I think that being able to articulate credentials coming out of variety areas of learning, being able to gather them. I mean, this conversation is all about that. At JFF, Sharon Liu is leading an initiative to articulate learner credential wallet specification. Kim, I know you've been a contributor to some of this, and others have joined in. And this is really thinking about sort of the technical how it can work to enable. I think where your question is sort of heading is, you know, what are some of the exciting use cases that we could envision for connecting to careers, new education opportunities, new pathways into new roles. And so, one of the things that's sort of like the holy grail of this work, as everybody knows, is being able to aggregate in one place learning from a number of sources, whether it's formalized learning, post-secondary higher ed, high school, and so forth, but also learning on the job, maybe credentials that are issued by employers specifically for an initiative maybe they're running, but is not sort of understandable, accepted as a record of some sort with another employer elsewhere, or even a demonstration of competency. And so I think that being able to really, work at the technical level, to be able to articulate a standard, sort of talking a little bit about Sharon's work, so that different programs can all contribute into a variety of systems, pocket wallets, all sorts of things, and they are interoperable. That's one of the things that I think, in terms of awareness of a movement, that's really exciting. The other thing that I'll add is just thinking about the importance of sort of how we get standards like these adopted. So one of the things that I really love about this problem is that it's technical, yes, and it's a lot about people. What are the incentives that people will need to adopt these standards, to start using them, to share information between? How does everybody know that our own initiatives can be more powerful together than each of us sort of working independently? And I'm working with Sharon on a market scan as part of our work, just to sort of, what's the lay of the land, articulating the team I lead here at JFF. That's part of what we do. And one of the exciting things I'm interested in is sort of historically, what are some standards initiatives that are notable, that can be inspiring for why this is an important thing to pursue, like just the history of the cinder block in architecture was revolutionary. And so being able to bring out some of those analogs and talk about the behavior and why the buy-in is so important, I think is also very exciting.
Stephen, you bring up a really good point about the validation of that learning. And I just kind of want to go back a little ways, because ACE has been validating and benchmarking the learning currency in terms of semester hour credit recommendations for over 60 years. And as domains and environments are evolving, what is a competency? What is a credential? What's needed in electrical and engineering might look different than medical in terms of those taxonomies and frameworks. And so at ACE, we've been spending 60 years, okay, well, not me personally, but ACE, looking at how we continue to evolve this and collaborate. A new area that we've really been digging into is apprenticeships. What learning is occurring through apprenticeship projects in the formal courses they receive, but also on the job, validating that in terms of learning currencies, but also competencies, and then getting that documented. Kim may be a little older version of a transcript. It's a digital transcript, but as a seed to building out the broader portfolio and work and the way forward. So I know Sharon's been a big advocate working with us at ACE too. So I was excited by that conversation, and thanks for sharing.
I would jump in here on that idea of a broader portfolio of work, also as a means of sharing a broader expression of our identity. So if we're looking to build digital trust and agency to be worthy of, of trust, to be trustworthy, we need to be worthy of trust. And as Stephen was saying, that the technology is interesting and important, but it's ultimately, it's all about people. And so how do we infuse the process of using and applying this technology, as well as creating and developing it, as well as designing standards in a way that humanizes us, in a way that is more humane? That I'm always looking for, how can we become more human and more humane, even in this highly digital space? In fact, especially in this highly digital space, because if we miss that piece, we risk dehumanizing ourselves. So the idea that we build trust by working with trusted brands or other educational institutions that we recognize is an understandable inclination, but it's also dangerous by excluding the sources of credible credit that otherwise don't get counted. So I'm really curious about how we're going to expand that portfolio of what can be digitally trusted and credentialed, not only from unexpected sources, but with unexpected content. So in addition to the traditional learning credit that we have and want to capture and share more efficiently and more effectively, there's so much of our life's experience that we want to capture and give credit for, especially as we're developing our workforce, as we're developing our minds and our bodies and our systems over the course of a lifetime. So how do we credential and capture in a way that is trustworthy and humane our creative output, our socially impactful or conscientious work, our community building, our field building, our thought leadership? And this is where I think it gets really interesting and juicy. I also think that it's where the creative sector and leadership and emergence are so important to help inform how we shape these new platforms. As an example, Stephen, of standard setting, I was thinking about a progress that was made, still more that needs to happen at the global level with standard setting around development. So we had, as we'll recall from the UN, the Millennium Development Goals that Secretary General Kofi Annan shepherded us through. And it was this great idea that said, here's where we want to be. But it was missing input from people around the world. It was missing a perspective of the communities being effective, but also the community drivers. And it was missing a blueprint of how we would actually get there. So the Sustainable Development Goals we now have were attempted to improve on that process. But wait, there's more. Because whatever comes next, I hope will be integrating regeneration and creativity as forces for transformation that humanize us. And I hope that those will be forces that come into the development of our learning agency and digital trust.
That's a really good point, because I was just meeting with Digital Promise. They're leaning into a new project with LERs, learner employer records. And one of the key conversations we're having is not make assumptions. Right? How do we not make assumptions into designing and promoting an equitable, transparent, and skills-based system for all working age adults at every stage of their careers, whether entry or transitioning out of the employment workforce. So it's an important conversation to continue to have.
And I think we need to listen very humbly and openly to conversations that that aren't here, that aren't around this table. So how can we, excavate as while we're innovating? How do we excavate the wisdom of elders, of marginalized communities, of traditional communities, indigenous peoples, of the voices who have perhaps not been in the room with the designers, but will be able to shed light on how we can see things in new ways. So that excavating companion to innovating is how we'll really create, I think, a new path forward.
Very, very intriguing conversation here and discussion. There's something that Diana mentioned and alluded to, and I believe Stephen did as well, around the technology. Kim, I'm wondering if you could kind of share with us a little bit, your perspective of how, different technologies like disruptive, or rather distributed ledger technologies and other things like that have sort of impacted this work in this space.
So I'm going to give my glib answer first and say it's about the friends we made along the way, because it's not done a whole lot as of yet. And I think a lot of where my focus has been over the last few years is figuring out exactly what we get out of distributed ledgers and blockchains, and depending on whether they're public or private, and who might be running them. What sort of model they might be using for trust in the blockchain itself, how long they've been out there and subject to attack, like sort of battle tested. And so, with that, I think that that's helped be part of this broader conversation of, we don't really need to use the blockchain as much as we had. What are the key characteristics that can benefit us? And sometimes they might be things like anchoring identifiers, registries, like things to store credential status, but we don't need to be putting records on the blockchain, for example. So it's good that we're sort of teasing apart what we get out of it. And then also, what effects longevity effects that have, certainly, and for the GDPR, right to be forgotten, any complications around that. I do think, though, I think that Stephen mentioned it around sort of wallets, and I think that there has been a huge expansion of interest in wallets, implying people are carrying these records, or at least some pointer to records. And so the role that distributed ledger has there, there's some very valuable possibilities there. And I think having that conversation in a more nuanced way has been something I've been excited to see. I think, certainly maybe a couple of years ago, people were pushing these very, do it this way, and it's sort of all or nothing, all the identity data on someone's blockchain. And the solutions like that have a lot of risks to them, including lack of longevity if it's something controlled by just one party or group of parties. So I'm very happy to see more nuance to the discussion happening.
Curious if I know the rest of you also have been thinking, Michele, I know at ACE, Stephen, I know at JFF, you guys have also been thinking about these technologies as well. Perhaps you can add some color to some of the comments and supplement.
Well, I think it's back to really listening to what Diana was saying, right, to the various stakeholder groups, because if we're going to think about building trust, what does that mean? How do we define building trust? Well, we got to mitigate the fear. Well, how do we mitigate the fear? We have to create opportunities to learn. And those opportunities are going to look very different, whether you're a college or university, whether you're the individual that's holding the record. So how do we create those hands-on learning, those user design thinking input sessions for a technology? And we hear scary things all the time about technology and how, security and safety of our identity and records. How do we break that down in a way that is manageable and leaning forward. So at ACE, we're doing this with our working transcript, our digital working transcript, and this is in partnership with Credly, with learners. And we recently surveyed our learners. I'm sorry I don't have the data to share, but 1,100 learners who have requested transcripts from ACE in the past few years, some of their desires, their needs, what are they looking for, what do they need help with, just to try to get a better idea of their behaviors and their expectations of us, and helping them to validate their workplace learning in a way that they can use it in different environments.
And I'll sort of add to this. I mean, I was thinking about listening to the conversation just to be a little bit provocative. I mean, I think it would be a great thing if we had like identity theft of digital records, education records. Like we had to secure them because that was an indication that they were being used and they're valuable and people are recognizing them. But I think, you know, the more important point, I think, from what we're getting at, I think is really thinking about multiple pathways and equity. So, you know, there's sort of a question about, you know, issuers and trust of known organizations and so forth. And so, you know, those trust structures across our education workforce systems unintentionally reinforce pre-existing bias, inequitable pathways, and so forth. And so, you know, the motivation for getting the technology pieces right and being able to have the buy-in from a number of issuers, buy-in from, you know, a range of experiences and voices is really critically important to being able to move the mark. I mean, at JFF, we believe in multiple pathways. I mean, higher ed is amazing. And so are two-year credentials and other experiences. So being able to articulate one's skill set from a wide range has not only sort of like the technical components and the need there, but it also has a really important societal function, is what I was thinking about.
Yeah, some notes on that. I've been really impressed with the work of the T3 Innovation Network run by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and including open conversations around representation, because what happens a lot of times in any organization, maybe the attitude towards participation is, well, anyone can show up, but that implies a lot of filters already, and, you know, one, having the time to do it, but then certainly in a lot of the circles I run in, like with the standards bodies, you know, yeah, maybe we start with some practical use cases, but then it quickly devolves to the point that only a handful of very technical people can contribute to it. And so that's been an increasing concern of mine, that you know, the standards that are core to what we're working on, you know, if even highly technical people can't read it, comprehend it, respond to it, like what chance do we have for privacy experts and other people who are trying to figure out the potential outcomes and risks? So that's the biggest problem that I think we just all need to be thinking about, because we kind of can't do enough on that front.
I think that's an area that's so critical, Kim, and speaks to the space where Leonardo plays, because we're so much about serving the community that integrates this intersection of artists and scientists and technologists to be co-creating and integrating their work. And I envision a couple years from now, when we reconvene, about how much trust we've built in the humanized digital world, that there are creatives from the arts, creatives from science, creatives from technology, who are embedded in those rooms where we can't speak the same language, and we don't even know what the other one's talking about, so that we start to really learn from each other's wrestling with these issues, because our communities are all wrestling with these issues of equity, issues of access, issues of privacy, and certainly issues of trust. I do think that the issue in question underlying trust that we haven't really talked about yet has been shaken in this current period, in the recent period, not by technology, but perhaps exacerbated or in tandem with technology because of social and political changes that we are still passing through, that have made us question what we believe in. And if everything we knew changed so quickly, how do we trust where we are or where we're going? I do think there's a kind of existential moment we're in that matters. And we're part of, in wrestling with the digital interface, the process of moving, through that and from that.
This is wonderful, and it's actually a great segue into another aspect of these questions. Curious, and this is for everyone, whoever is interested in speaking up. How do you envision the future of digital credentials and learner agency? I mean, just if you're kind of forecasting out, what does it look like to you?
Well, I'll jump in as the least technology oriented person here. It looks beautiful. It looks organic. It looks different than it now feels. I would love to see, and I think it will be really meaningful if we could figure this out, a kind of biophilic design that integrates from biophilia, this alignment with our human connection to nature and beauty into technology. It would be such a different experience, and so appealing, accessible, humanizing in ways, and illuminating in ways that I don't think we've even begun to consider. Artists are considering that, working with technology, working with science. I can't wait to learn from that. And I think that it is in our future. I also predict that the quantifiable traditional credentials we're capturing now will be augmented by new currency that's currently undervalued. So the currency of our social commitments, of our personal enrichment, the currency of balance, the currency of creativity, the currency of generosity. These aren't even words we use in this conversation. They're incredibly powerful human currency that we undervalue in our systems, but not in our lives. And I think that we're going to be integrating and closing the gap between our system structure and what we really value as human beings and as members of a natural ecosystem that is beyond what we can count in our bank account or the name that's on my transcript or the numbers on my transcript. So I'm inspired by Toni Morrison, who says, "You are not the work that you do, you are the person that you are." I imagine and invite a future digital platform that helps us share and show the persons we are, not just the work that we do.
I can go next. I think I'm also inspired by a lot of work to represent, I guess, as Diana was saying, more of the whole person. And even if the efforts that we're working on are starting by representing very traditional kinds of educational credentials, I think that I'm starting to see momentum around, and I'll say this to a group of very highly degreed individuals, but we all know that it's kind of weird that all of our effective professional reputation rests on these things at very flat degrees that happened a long time ago. And certainly the model I always like to use is a job listing that's asking for a rock star developer and, 4-year degree for, and so this is starting to increasingly chip away. There are risks, certainly. I think also Diana mentioned the idea of, so I have very mixed feelings, very good and very concerned about Google's efforts, for example, the certifications. I love that they're opening up tech jobs to a broader range of people without a traditional degree. There are also a lot of concerns. If you've seen any episode of Black Mirror, you just see it all laying out right in front of you. So, I'm just hoping, I think there's a lot of very interesting trends. And I like the work that Talent Cloud in Canada specifically is doing. Around expressing, taking all of the job listings and, anywhere that the listing is being, having maybe more of a gatekeeping kind of role than a capability or skills sort of role, converting these job postings. So I see a lot of work involved to do it the right way. So I'm hoping we can kind of even out the progress to make it more accessible and not something that's totally owned and controlled by companies.
And though I dropped my crystal ball on the way to this Zoom conversation to foresee the future, I like to think of is what an individual learns is more important than when, where, or how they learned it. But we need a validated way to set that individual up for success, right? So I see this as a way of life, as a journey. It's not a destination. And so it's got to be organic and evolving. And as I get to work with individuals day to day through our corporate evaluations, our military connected learner populations, the reality that, oh my goodness, I do bring something of value to this more than just a piece of paper or certificate. I think as we're building up that human piece of it, as that learning occurs, the technology and the human pieces will start to come together. So that's my hope as we move forward. And I guess that leaves you, Stephen, for the final words of wisdom.
Yeah, I'll just say ditto 3 times. I mean, I thought everybody's comments were terrific. Biophilic is a terrific vision as well. I mean, I think that especially with how we define the skills, the human skills that will be most valuable moving forward. Automation is increasingly making more nuanced skills more and more valuable for people. And I think that there's a whole range of challenges to address through this work, how skills like that are articulated well. They have a lot of different ranges. What leadership can look like in one job looks totally different in another. But having said that, I think that conversations like these are absolutely critical. As a technologist by sort of nature, I believe in sort of starting and getting moving. And I really appreciate and admire every organization that's working on this problem, because it really is an all hands on deck kind of a moment and problem. So really appreciate the discussion.
Thank you so much. And we're almost at time. So I want to take a quick moment and just look in the chat and see questions. I believe we had a question from Phil Long. Good to see you, Phil. So Phil asked the question of how does the panel see technology connecting or augmenting our corporeal selves and our connection to communities and global systems? Curious, open to the panel. Curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think we experienced a year and a half of this, of answering or experimenting with that question, where we've been physically isolated and socially connected through technology. That's led to some really interesting experiments. I think some interesting insights that have yet to be revealed. But with Leonardo, we've supported and initiated quite a few creative endeavors to use this technology to express our work through performance, through visual arts, through new technology of visual arts. We just now published the first published AR art in Leonardo, just came out last week. piece that I collaborated on with my partner, Bill Ayton. First AR Art MIT Press has published. And this is yet another way that we're extending through technology what we would embody in corporeally.
Wonderful response to that, Diana. Does anyone, I don't know if anyone else has anything they'd like to add. Okay, guys, we're running up on time here. We're finishing right on time, which I'm incredibly proud of. Thank you so much to this panel. You guys have been absolutely amazing. I couldn't be happier with the way this discussion went. Thank you so much to each of you.